I used to think love was enough. A potent, unyielding force capable of weathering any storm, bridging any chasm, dissolving any doubt. I used to believe that Elena and I, with our shared dreams and intertwined ambitions, were an anomaly. That we would never become those desolate figures who barely acknowledge each other across a dinner table, lost in the silent static of their own lives. But here we are. And sometimes, looking into the mirror, I don't even recognize the woman staring back. Hollow-eyed, sharp-edged, a stranger to the vibrant girl I once was. My name is Elena. I am 35. And this is the story of how I systematically dismantled my own marriage, brick by meticulous brick, because I was too damn important for a simple, necessary hug. Ethan and I met 8 years ago. We were both nascent in our careers, fueled by an almost desperate ambition, sharing a tiny apartment in the city we could barely afford. I was relentlessly climbing the corporate ladder, a tireless hustler in a cutthroat world. He, equally dedicated, was quietly building his reputation in his own field, a burgeoning architectural designer with an eye for detail and a heart for innovation. We were a team back then, or at least, that's what I told myself. We'd burn the midnight oil side by side, him sketching designs, me poring over market reports, the quiet hum of our shared focus, a comforting soundtrack to our nascent future. Looking back, perhaps I was already casting him as the supporting character in my grand narrative, rather than envisioning us as co-authors of a shared epic. The subtle shift in perspective, so insidious in its inception, was already taking root. Everything changed, irrevocably, when I landed that promotion last year. Suddenly, I wasn't just an account manager, I was managing major accounts. I wasn't just attending company events, I was getting invited to exclusive executive dinners. I was finally becoming someone significant, a name that echoed in the hallowed halls of the C-suite. The thrill of it was intoxicating, a powerful elixir that coursed through my veins, dulling every other sensation. Ethan, bless his heart, celebrated with me. He brought home a bottle of my favorite champagne, took me out to our little Italian spot, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the surprisingly good Chianti. He congratulated me with genuine warmth, his smile reaching his eyes, but even then, I sensed something else flickering beneath the surface. Was it pride? Or was it a nascent fear that I was pulling away, leaving him behind in the dust of my ascent? I didn't have time to ponder his feelings then. My own triumph was too overwhelming, too demanding of my complete attention. I had, after all, finally arrived. Around the same time, Marcus joined the company. He was slick, charismatic, and quick to grasp the intricate politics of our organization. He quickly became my work confidant, an almost too perfect mirror of my own ambition. Marcus understood the relentless pressure I was under, the brutal demands of quarterly reports and client expectations. Unlike Ethan, who simply ran his little projects and came home at 5:30 every single day, Marcus and I would stay late, strategizing, dissecting corporate maneuvers, our minds buzzing with shared energy. I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than going home, the intellectual sparring more stimulating than the quiet domesticity that awaited me. I didn't realize I was slowly, meticulously, chipping away at Ethan's confidence, one backhanded compliment at a time. "You're too nice, Ethan. That's your problem." Or, "Your designs are beautiful, really, but maybe not quite edgy enough for today's market." I was cutting him down, not consciously out of malice, but to make my own meteoric rise seem even more impressive, even more justified. I couldn't understand why Ethan couldn't just be happy for me, unequivocally, without needing so much reassurance, so much emotional hand-holding. Marcus, certainly, understood. He'd listened to me vent about Ethan's neediness, his brow furrowed in sympathetic understanding. "Sounds like he's threatened by your success, Elena," he'd say, and I'd feel a powerful surge of validation. Here, finally, was someone who saw the real me, the strong, independent woman battling the insecurities of a less driven partner. Meanwhile, I was conveniently forgetting dinner with Ethan's parents, but remembering every single work happy hour. I'd promised to visit his mother, Eleanor, a sweet woman with kind eyes and a gentle spirit, but I'd cancel last minute, citing emergencies at work. Eleanor never said anything directly, not a single word of complaint or criticism, but I could feel her watching me, those knowing eyes following my every move whenever we were in the same room. A quiet, unspoken judgment that pricked at my conscience, though I quickly dismissed it. I'd laugh it off later to Ethan, telling him his mom was old-fashioned, that she simply didn't understand modern careers, the demands placed upon women like me. What I didn't know then, what I refused to see, was that my own parents had written this exact, agonizing script decades earlier. My father, a workaholic driven by an insatiable hunger for success, always working, always too important for family dinners, for school plays, for the quiet intimacies of everyday life. My mother, perpetually seeking his validation, growing more bitter, more resentful, with each passing year of neglect. I swore I'd never become either of them. Yet somehow, in my relentless pursuit of external glory, I had become the worst of both, demanding recognition and admiration, while callously withholding affection, attention, and the fundamental kindness that nourishes a relationship. While I was ruthlessly climbing the corporate ladder, collecting fleeting validation from Marcus and the accolades of my peers, Ethan was quietly carrying burdens I didn't bother to ask about. Our marriage, once a sturdy oak, was crumbling, and I was too busy checking my email, too engrossed in my own self-importance, to notice the rubble falling around us. The morning it all fell apart, definitively, irreparably, started like any other. I woke up before my alarm, immediately reaching for my phone, the glowing screen a familiar comfort, a portal to the urgent demands of my world. Overnight emails, market updates, client requests, they were my first thought, my first priority. Ethan was already in the kitchen. I could smell the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the savory scent of something cooking. It was irritating, really. His morning cheerfulness, his unwavering domesticity, always felt like a passive-aggressive commentary on my stress levels, a silent accusation of my inability to relax, to simply be. Ethan had made breakfast, eggs perfectly scrambled, avocado toast artfully arranged, the works. Thought we could use a few minutes together, he said, sliding a plate toward me, his voice gentle. Feel like I've barely seen you this week. I checked my watch, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. I have a presentation at 9 a.m., Ethan. I don't have time for whatever this is. I grabbed a piece of toast and my coffee mug, already moving toward my home office, my mind racing through slides and talking points. Elena, wait, he said, and something in his voice, a subtle tremor, a raw vulnerability, made me pause, just for a moment. Can we talk? Just for a minute? I sighed dramatically, a theatrical exhale designed to convey my extreme inconvenience. About what? I've been trying to tell you something for days, but you've been so busy, he said, and I finally registered how tired he looked, how the shadows beneath his eyes seemed deeper than usual. It's about my mom. The doctors found. My phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent vibration. Marcus. A question about the presentation, no doubt. Sorry, I need to take this, I said. Already turning away, my focus irrevocably pulled back to the demands of my career. Can it wait until tonight? Ethan stared at me for a long moment. His eyes, usually so warm, now clouded with an unfamiliar weariness. Then, slowly, he nodded. Sure. Tonight. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, a promise I had no intention of keeping. When I finally emerged, dressed in my power suit, ready for battle, he was by the door, putting on his jacket. I'm heading out, he said, his voice oddly formal, devoid of its usual warmth. Good luck with your presentation. I was checking a last-minute email on my phone, half listening, half distracted. Thanks. Don't wait up tonight. Probably doing dinner with the team after. Another casual dismissal, another broken promise. He stood there a moment too long, a silent, unmoving presence. I finally looked up, irritated by his hovering. Elena, he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Could I get a hug before I go? I stared at him, genuinely confused. A hug? Now? When I was clearly in a rush, my mind already rehearsing corporate jargon and financial projections? Something about the sheer neediness of it, the childishness of asking for affection when I was so obviously preoccupied, hit a nerve I didn't even know was exposed. It felt like an imposition, an entitled demand on my precious, finite time. Are you serious right now? I snapped, my voice laced with contempt. You're not a kid, Ethan. Grow up. I moved past him, grabbing my expensive leather bag, already halfway out the door. I don't have time for this. I opened the door and gestured for him to leave, then slammed it shut behind us both, the echoing thud a final, brutal punctuation mark on our silent argument. In the elevator, we stood in a suffocating silence. I was already mentally rehearsing my presentation, refining my arguments, oblivious to the way Ethan seemed to shrink into himself, how he stared straight ahead as if seeing something far beyond the mundane confines of the elevator doors. We parted in the lobby without a word, two strangers sharing a brief, awkward space. As I drove to work, my mind buzzing with the morning's events, I texted Marcus one-handed, a perverse pleasure in sharing my exasperation. You won't believe what just happened. Ethan asked for a hug this morning like a freaking kindergartner while I'm trying to get to my presentation. Marcus responded immediately, his words a balm to my irritated ego. Yikes. Man-child alert. Want me to review your slides one more time before the meeting? I smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. This was what understanding looked like. This was the kind of support I deserved. The presentation was, predictably, a hit. Afterward, I found Marcus by the coffee machine, and the conspiratorial smile he gave me felt like a secret handshake, a bond of shared superiority. Your husband still sulking over that hug? He asked, his voice low enough that others couldn't hear. I rolled my eyes, enjoying having someone who got it. God, you should have seen him. Like I have time to coddle his feelings before the biggest presentation of the quarter. Men can be so emotionally needy, Marcus agreed, his tone perfectly calibrated. Some people just can't handle being with a powerful woman. That afternoon, I regaled Marcus with the morning's events over lunch, embellishing slightly, painting a picture of a demanding, overly emotional husband. In my version, Ethan had practically begged for attention, whining about how I never made time for him anymore. What I didn't know, what I was willfully blind to, was that Ethan had received the final, devastating confirmation of layoffs at his company the day before. What I didn't know was that his mother, Eleanor's routine checkup, had revealed breast cancer that had already spread to her lymph nodes. When he asked for that hug, it wasn't neediness. It was a drowning man engulfed by a sudden, brutal wave of fear and despair reaching for a lifeline, and I, in my self-absorbed blindness, had not only cut the rope but had laughed as he went under. For the next 2 weeks, I barely noticed how little we spoke. Ethan left for work before I woke up and was often asleep, or pretending to be, when I came home. On weekends, he mentioned visiting his mother, but I was too preoccupied with my own burgeoning success, too engrossed in the latest corporate drama, to ask for details. When I bothered to notice his absence at all, I told myself it was a relief not to deal with his neediness, his subtle demands on my time and emotional energy. At work, Marcus became increasingly attentive, finding reasons for us to collaborate on projects, suggesting late meetings that inevitably turned into dinner or drinks. I told myself this was networking, career advancement, certainly not the emotional affair it was rapidly becoming. It's like Ethan doesn't even see how important my work is. I complained to Marcus one evening over martinis, the alcohol loosening my tongue. He acts like I should drop everything because his mom has some health scare. Marcus nodded sympathetically, though something flickered in his eyes, a momentary hesitation I chose to ignore. What exactly is wrong with his mom? He asked. I paused, a sudden, uncomfortable realization dawning on me. I didn't actually know. Some tests or something, I said vaguely. He tried to tell me, but picked literally the worst time. The truth was that Ethan had stopped trying to tell me anything. The man who once shared every thought, every dream, every fear with me now moved through our apartment like a ghost, taking care not to disturb me, to not impinge on my precious solitude. And the most disturbing part? I preferred it this way. My sister Camille's surprise visit, 3 weeks after the hug incident, was the first crack in my carefully constructed self-delusion. She showed up on a Saturday, a rarity, when Ethan was supposedly at his mother's. "Where's Ethan?" she asked after greeting me, her eyes already taking in the quiet of our apartment. "At his mom's again," I rolled my eyes, the familiar irritation surfacing. "He's been there every weekend lately. You'd think she was dying or something." Camille gave me an odd look, her brow furrowed. "Is she sick?" I flinched slightly. "Some health thing. He tried to tell me, but I was in the middle of prep for a massive presentation. Camille followed me to the kitchen, her gaze unwavering. So, you don't know what's wrong with your mother-in-law? I've been swamped at work, Cam, I snapped, exasperated. Major accounts, executive track potential. You know. She studied me with an uncomfortable intensity. The Ethan I know would never keep something important from you, Elena, unless he felt he couldn't tell you. Before I could formulate a defensive retort, the front door opened. Ethan walked in, stopping short as he saw Camille. But his surprise quickly transformed into genuine warmth as he embraced her. Camille, this is a nice surprise. The hug lasted a beat longer than normal, and I felt an unexpected pang watching them, a strange mix of envy and a longing I couldn't quite articulate. How are you? She asked, her tone suggesting a deeper question than a casual greeting. Managing? He said with a tired smile. That's when his phone rang. Ethan checked the screen, and his expression changed, a flash of raw worry before he composed himself. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped into our bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. When he emerged a few minutes later, his face was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his mouth. Everything okay? Camille asked, her voice gentle. Just Mom's doctor, he said, not looking at me. They're adjusting her treatment schedule. Treatment for what? Camille asked the question I should have asked weeks ago. Ethan's eyes flickered to me, a brief, cutting glance, before answering. The breast cancer. They found it 6 weeks ago, but it's already in her lymph nodes. He paused, his voice barely a whisper. Stage 3. I felt like I'd been slapped. 6 weeks ago. That was before the hug morning. Before I'd dismissed his attempt to confide in me, before I'd called him childish, before I'd slammed the door in his face. Ethan, I started, my voice catching in my throat, but he was already gathering his keys and wallet. I should get back to the hospital. They're doing another round of tests today. Ethan, wait. Camille intervened, her hand reaching out to him. How are you holding up with all this? And with everything else? She glanced pointedly at me. He gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on what matters. Again, his eyes deliberately avoided mine. Olivia next door has been amazing. She's been helping coordinate Mom's care team since she knows the hospital system. Olivia? I blurted, a sudden, sharp stab of something akin to jealousy. Who's Olivia? Our neighbor from 4B, Ethan said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. She's been bringing dinner for Mom and me at the hospital most nights. With that, he left, the door closing quietly behind him, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Camille turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. Elena, what the hell is going on? His mother has cancer. He's spending evenings with some neighbor, and you don't know any of this? I sank onto a bar stool, genuinely stunned. I've been busy with work. He never said it was cancer. Did you ever give him the chance to tell you? Camille's question was a blunt force trauma, echoing the memory of that morning, him trying to talk about his mother, me brushing him off for a text from Marcus. There's something else, Camille said carefully, her voice softer now. When I hugged him, Elena, he felt different, like he's lost weight. And did you see how tired he looks? I hadn't. I genuinely hadn't noticed anything about my own husband in weeks. Months, if I was brutally honest. What happened between you two? She asked, her gaze piercing. I thought about telling her some sanitized version of events, glossing over the ugliness, but suddenly, the truth came pouring out. The hug, the door slamming, my cruel, dismissive words. You know what that reminds me of? She finally said, her voice quiet but firm. Dad. Remember how he'd make Mom feel small whenever she needed anything from him? How he always put his work first? The comparison felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. All my life, I'd sworn I'd never become our emotionally unavailable father, cold and distant behind his fortress of work. Yet, here I was, treating Ethan exactly as Dad had treated Mom, as an inconvenience, a secondary concern, a drain on my precious, limited resources. After Camille left for her hotel, a quiet sigh of disappointment escaping her lips, I sat alone in our apartment, really seeing it for the first time in months. Ethan's presence had been fading gradually, imperceptibly. His favorite books no longer graced the coffee table. His quirky, mismatched mug was missing from the dish rack. Subtle signs of withdrawal, of a slow, quiet retreat, that I'd been too self-absorbed, too caught up in my own soaring narrative, to notice. On impulse, I opened our shared home office, a space that had once been a symbol of our intertwined lives, now merely a testament to my singular focus. I scanned Ethan's desk. It was tidied, almost sterile, as if he barely used it anymore. My eyes fell on our filing cabinet. I pulled open a drawer, looking for clues to a life I'd been willfully ignoring. And there they were, medical documents. Eleanor's cancer diagnosis, dated 6 weeks earlier. Treatment plans, prognosis notes, port to moderate, insurance forms with alarming numbers. Beneath those, another folder, labeled simply, Work. Inside was a formal layoff notice, dated the day before the hug incident, unemployment application paperwork, and, to my surprise, several freelance contracts, dated within the past 2 weeks. My husband had lost his job. His mother was dying, and he had been quietly, diligently rebuilding his career alone, all while I had been mocking him to Marcus for being emotionally needy, for acting like a man-child. The hypocrisy was a bitter taste in my mouth, a burning shame that spread through my chest. The apartment door opened, startling me. Ethan stood there, looking even more exhausted than before, the weight of the world heavy on his shoulders. "What are you doing?" he asked, his eyes falling on the papers spread around me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, perhaps the worst possible response, a desperate, accusatory cry born of my own guilt. "About your job? About your mom? Any of it?" Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, which I could have handled, which I might have even preferred, but a calm, chilling detachment that frightened me more than any outburst. "I tried," he said simply, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "That morning, the one where you told me to grow up, I was going to tell you everything, my layoff, mom's diagnosis, all of it, but you were too busy, remember?" "You could have tried again," I argued weakly, desperate to deflect the blame, to find some crack in his composure. "I did. For years, Elena," he replied, his voice still terrifyingly calm, but with an underlying weariness that spoke of battles long fought and lost. "Every time I needed you, you had something more important. Every time I shared a concern, you dismissed it. Every time I reached out." He trailed off, shaking his head, a gesture of profound resignation. "That morning wasn't the beginning. It was the end. It was me finally accepting what you've been showing me for years, that I don't matter to you." "That's not true," I protested, a desperate sob catching in my throat. "Then, where is my mother being treated?" he asked quietly, his gaze steady, unwavering. I opened my mouth, then closed it, no answer forming. "What stage is her cancer?" "Stage 3, I whispered, remembering Camille's words. "And what's her oncologist's name?" Silence. "Who's been covering her medical expenses?" More silence. "These aren't trick questions, Elena," he said, his calm devastating. "They're the basic details of my life for the past 6 weeks. Details you chose not to know." I would have preferred yelling, screaming, anything but this detached recitation of my failures, this cold, clinical dissection of my neglect. "The hug," I said desperately, clutching at straws. "You're overreacting to one bad morning when I was stressed." "It was never about the hug," he interrupted, his voice still terrifyingly calm, a chilling counterpoint to my rising panic. "The hug was just the moment I finally accepted what I'd been denying for years." "You don't want a partner, Elena. You want an audience." "That's not fair," I said, feeling tears threatening, a hot sting behind my eyes. "Isn't it?" he challenged, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly, but without warmth. "When was the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you remembered something important to me? When was the last time you chose me over work, even once?" Each question landed like a physical blow, because I knew the answer to all of them. I couldn't remember. His quiet certainty terrified me more than any argument could have. I'd always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of our relationship. Now, Ethan was walking away with a clarity I didn't possess, a resolve that shook me to my core. "You can't just leave," I said, hating how childish, how desperate I sounded. "I already have," he replied simply. "Emotionally, anyway. I've been leaving for months while you were too busy with Marcus to notice. The mention of Marcus stung, a sudden, sharp jab of humiliation. He's a colleague, I said automatically, the words hollow even to my own ears. He's whatever you need him to be, Ethan said, and the sad understanding in his voice was worse than any accusation. As he gathered some clothes and toiletries, I followed him around the apartment, alternating between flashes of anger and frantic pleading. His calm remained unshaken, which only fueled my growing panic. This isn't fair, I insisted, my voice rising. You're making a massive decision based on one bad morning. No, he said, turning to face me, his eyes finally holding a flicker of pain. I'm making it based on hundreds of bad mornings, missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and dismissive comments. The hug was just the final data point. A week passed with no word from Ethan beyond practical texts about bills and mail. Marcus, true to form, continued to be mysteriously unavailable, always with a work excuse that I now recognized for the brush-offs they were. When I finally confronted him in person at the office, his response was revealing, cold, and utterly devoid of the sympathy he had once so readily offered. Look, Elena, I enjoy our work conversations, but I'm not getting involved in your personal drama. That's not what this is, I protested, my voice cracking. What is this exactly? He asked, his gaze surprisingly direct. Suddenly, I saw our relationship for what it was, not the deep intellectual connection I'd convinced myself existed, but a shallow alliance of convenience, a temporary ego boost. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. We're colleagues, work friends. I'm not your therapist or your divorce counsel. All those lunches, happy hours, late-night text sessions, they had meant nothing to him beyond office entertainment. I'd been sharing intimate details of my marriage, seeking his validation, while to him, I was just another work acquaintance, a means to an end. I spent that weekend alone in our apartment, the silence deafening, really thinking about what Camille and Ethan had said. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, images from early in our marriage, Ethan and me laughing on hiking trips, cooking together, looking at each other with genuine love, our eyes mirroring a shared joy. When had I stopped seeing him? When had his feelings become inconvenient intrusions rather than the very foundations of our partnership? On Monday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a day off work without a specific reason, something utterly alien to my routine. I drove to Eleanor's house, rehearsing what I would say to Ethan, how I would make him see that I could change, that I was finally ready to fight for us. But when I arrived, only Eleanor was there, looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that had always seemed to see right through me. Elena, she said, her voice neither welcoming nor dismissive, simply stating a fact. Ethan's not here. Could I wait for him? I asked, my voice small. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. He's with Olivia at a consultation with my new specialist. They'll be gone most of the day. Olivia, I repeated, feeling a familiar stab of jealousy, a bitterness I couldn't suppress. They seem close. She's been a godsend, Eleanor confirmed, her voice laced with genuine gratitude. She drives me to appointments when Ethan has work commitments, brings dinner most nights, knows all my medications. She paused meaningfully, her eyes holding mine. She sees him, Elena. Really sees him. The implication was clear, cutting deeper than any direct accusation. Unlike you, I want to fix things, I said, hating how small, how pathetic my voice sounded. Eleanor sighed, a weary sound. Some things can't be fixed. Some broken trust can't be restored. I made mistakes, I admitted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Big ones. But 8 years of marriage has to count for something. It counted for everything to Ethan, she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. That's why he tried so hard for so long. That's why he kept hoping you'd see him again. And now? I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. Now he's learning to build a life where he doesn't need to beg for basic kindness. When I finally left, Eleanor called after me. Elena. I turned back. He did love you completely. I hope you find someone you love that much someday. Her use of the past tense, did love you, followed me all the way home, a haunting refrain. The final conversation happened 2 weeks later. Ethan asked to meet at a neutral coffee shop to discuss practical matters. I spent hours preparing what I would say, how I would articulate my remorse, how I would make him see that I could change, that I was finally awake. But when he walked in, I knew immediately. The man sitting across from me wasn't the husband who had asked for a hug that morning, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. He was someone new, calmer, more centered, with a quiet confidence I'd never seen before, a man who had found his footing outside of my shadow. "I think we should file for divorce," he said after we'd exchanged awkward, formal greetings. "I've drawn up a fair division of assets. You can have the apartment. No preamble, no drama, just a simple statement of fact that left no room for negotiation." "Just like that?" I said, struggling to keep my voice even, struggling against the sudden, overwhelming urge to scream. "You're throwing away 8 years without even trying to fix things?" "I did try," he said gently, his voice devoid of anger, only a profound weariness. "For years, Elena. Every dinner I made that you missed. Every conversation you cut short. Every time I reached out and you pulled away. Those were all me trying. One bad morning I started, my old defense mechanisms kicking in." "It was never about the hug," he interrupted, his voice still terrifyingly calm, echoing Eleanor's words. "How many times do I need to say that? The hug was just the moment I finally accepted what I'd been denying. You checked out of this marriage long before I did." "That's not fair," I protested, but the words sounded hollow, even to me. "Isn't it? Tell me, what's my mother's oncologist's name?" I stared at him, unable to answer, my mind a blank. "Dr. Melissa Chen," he supplied, his voice flat. "She's been treating Mom for almost 2 months now. What company am I freelancing for?" Again, I had no answer. "Robertson Design. I've mentioned it at least 3 times in texts about scheduling. What medication did I start taking 6 weeks ago?" My confusion must have shown on my face. "Antidepressants," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "I've been in therapy since before the hug incident for depression caused by years of emotional neglect." Each fact landed like a physical blow, not because they were meant to hurt me, but because they revealed how completely, utterly, disastrously I had failed to see the person I had promised to love, to cherish, to honor. "I didn't know," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You didn't ask," he replied, not unkindly, but with a simple, devastating truth. "You stopped asking years ago." His words stripped away my last defenses, shattered the carefully constructed facade of my self-importance. In that moment, sitting across from the man I had married, I finally saw the truth I'd been avoiding, the painful, undeniable reality that stared back at me from the depths of my own reflection. I had become my father. I had treated Ethan exactly as Dad had treated Mom, as an inconvenience, a supporting character, someone whose needs were always secondary to my own perceived importance. "It was never about the hug," I whispered again, finally understanding. The words a raw, painful admission. "No," Ethan agreed, a ghost of a sad smile touching his lips. "It was about everything the hug represented. Connection, vulnerability, basic human kindness. Things that should be given freely in a marriage, Elena, not treated as impositions." He slid a folder across the table. "Divorce papers, already prepared. Take your time reviewing these. There's no rush." As he stood to leave, I found myself asking the question that had been haunting me, a desperate plea for a different ending. "Were you ever going to tell me about your mom, your job, the depression, any of it?" He paused, his hand on the back of his chair, his gaze meeting mine for one last, long moment. "I did tell you, Elena. Many times. In many ways. You just weren't listening." With that, he walked away, leaving me alone with the wreckage of a marriage I had systematically, meticulously destroyed. The days that followed passed in a blur of numb disbelief. Marcus continued avoiding me at work, eventually admitting awkwardly that he'd been promoted to lead the Henderson account, an account that should have been mine, that I had been grooming for myself. He'd been using our friendship to gather information and ideas, all while positioning himself as my replacement. When I finally returned to the office after taking some time off, my position had been quietly downgraded, my most significant accounts reassigned. The empire I'd sacrificed my marriage for was crumbling, revealing how hollow it had been all along, a glittering facade built on sand. Months later, I ran into them at a farmer's market. Ethan, Olivia, and Eleanor in a wheelchair, looking frailer but undeniably vibrant. Eleanor was smiling, pointing out produce, her eyes bright, while Olivia filled a basket, a picture of warmth and attentive care. Ethan stood beside his mother, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder, his presence a quiet anchor. He saw me before I could retreat, before I could make my escape. For a moment, I thought he might pretend not to notice me, a small mercy. But instead, he said something to the women and walked over, his stride confident, his demeanor peaceful. "Elena," he said with polite warmth, but no lingering attachment, no echo of the past. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but the frantic desperation had subsided, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning acceptance. "How's your mom doing?" "Fighting hard," he said, glancing back at Eleanor with obvious love, a love I had once known. "The new treatment is tough, but she's tougher. And you?" I couldn't help asking, the question tearing itself from my throat. "Are you happy?" He considered the question seriously, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm at peace," he finally said. "Working on projects I care about, spending time with people who see me." The implication was clear, but not cruel. It was simply truth. "I'm glad," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. "You deserve that." As I watched him return to them, a small, self-contained unit of warmth and connection, I felt a strange mixture of regret and acceptance. I had lost something precious, irretrievable, through my own blindness and cruelty. But perhaps the pain of that recognition was the beginning of growth, a chance to become someone different from my father. Someone capable of seeing others as whole, complex people rather than mere supporting characters in my own, self-serving story. The woman who had slammed the door on her husband's desperate request for a hug would always be part of me, but she didn't have to be all of me. That, at least, was something I could change. Not for Ethan, not for any future relationship, but for myself. Because he had been right about the most important thing. It was never about the hug. It was about everything the hug represented. And maybe, just maybe, understanding that was the first, agonizing step toward becoming someone worthy of the connection I had so carelessly thrown away.